Mark Few has already coached the son of two basketball legends. Could Bronny James make it three?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you all by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Happy Monday, folks. We are doing a mailbag episode today. Got some great questions about some transfer portal targets, some recruiting stuff, some information about UConn and Purdue as they get set to square off for the national championship game. All sorts of good stuff here today on Locked On Zags. We're going to start, though, with a quick update on something I saw right before I hit record here. Michael Ajayi, transfer from Pepperdine, committed to Gonzaga last week. He has put his name into the 2024 NBA draft declaration. And his post on Twitter has caused a few people to go into a panic because he posted a picture of himself in a Pepperdine uniform, which I think is incredibly silly because he does not have pictures of himself in a Gonzaga uniform. Folks, he hasn't played for Gonzaga, so declaring for the NBA draft while photoshopping a picture of himself in a Gonzaga uniform just seems insanely weird, and I don't know why that's even a conversation. But he posted very specifically that he is declaring for the NBA draft while maintaining his college eligibility. So he's going to come to Gonzaga unless the NBA draft process goes extremely well for him. This shouldn't really be a surprise. Ajayi's only got 1 year of eligibility left. You're allowed to declare for the NBA draft multiple times before you then no longer have the ability to return to school. Michael Ajayi should do this. In fact, I suspect the coaching staff is encouraging him to do this. Go get feedback. Go find out what the scouts think about you. Michael Ajayi is in an interesting position. He spent 2 years at a junior college, had this explosive season at Pepperdine. Pepperdine has developed NBA talent. Maxwell Lewis is in the NBA out of Pepperdine. Kessler Edwards is in the NBA out of Pepperdine. But his 1 year of success on a bad team is kind of hard to gauge. So I think he's going to go get feedback. I think he's going to come back. I think he's going to go to Gonzaga. It's the exact same thing that Steele Venters did last year. Steele Venters entered the transfer portal. He committed to Gonzaga very shortly after entering the transfer portal, and then he declared for the NBA draft. He went through the process. He returned to school, and of course, we know what happened after that. He got injured, but that's the process that Ajayi is going through. So anybody's concerned about this, it's not something that I'm even remotely worried about. In fact, it's something I was expecting to happen. All right, let's get into the mailbag version of the show. This first question here comes from Jamie on Discord. Jamie says, Bronny James is in the portal and declared for the NBA draft. Where do you think he will end up playing next season? And is Gonzaga at all an option? Yes, let's talk about Bronny, folks. Bronny James declares for the NBA draft, totally expected. Again, you are allowed to do that multiple times. He does not have to stay in the NBA draft process, but considering the hype that he had, the pedigree he has, the quotes from LeBron James about wanting to play with his son, Bronny, we should have all expected Bronny to declare for the NBA draft, even though he did not have a season at USC last year that would typically lead to a player getting selected in the draft. Freshmen have underperformed and then gone into the NBA. It's not like this is unprecedented. Peyton Watson, who's a teammate of Julian Strother's at Denver right now, he was a freshman who did very, very little at UCLA in his 1 year. I think he averaged like less than 3 points per game. Peyton Watson's also 6'8" with a huge wingspan and has a tantalizing amount of upside and potential. Bronny is 6'4". He's not super big, not super long. I can understand the hesitation about him as an NBA player even before he put up a pretty pedestrian season for USC this year. Having said all that, USC's coach, Andy Enfield, departs. He goes to Southern Methodist. They are now have hired Eric Musselman. Huge move down in LA. Makes sense for Bronny to explore his options. Does he want to come back to USC where they don't have Isaiah Collier, they don't have Boogie Ellis, they don't have Kobe Johnson, a lot more room to operate, runs a high-octane offensive style. It kind of fits Bronny's style a little bit, but also I'm not sure if Muss's offense is actually perfect for Bronny, so he's got a lot of choices and decisions he has to make. From the Gonzaga side of things, Bronny's fit in Mark Few's offense is actually pretty evident. I think he would be great. Maybe not great. Like, he's not going to become an all-time Gonzaga point guard. He's not going to challenge, Williams Goss and Pangos and Dick Howe and those guys necessarily. But his style, he's very cerebral basketball player. He's a decent facilitator. He's not a great outside shooter yet, but I think he can get there. He makes quick decisions with the basketball. He's got good defensive instincts. I think a lot of that would fit really well in Mark Few's offensive and defensive schemes. But they don't have room for him. Bronny James is not transferring somewhere to not play. Nor should he. He wants to fast track his NBA career because he wants to play with his dad. His dad wants to play with him. LeBron's still performing at a super elite level right now, but he's not young. So for Bronny, he doesn't want to come to Gonzaga where he'd be coming off the bench. If either Nembhard or Hickman were not here next year, I honestly would probably be banging the drum pretty hard for Bronny to come in, because I think he could be a really good fit next to either of those two guys or in like a bigger role. But as it stands right now, there's just not room for him at Gonzaga to play a big enough role. And I don't think the staff can convince him, hey, come in, play a year, kind of behind Ryan and Nolan and get your bearings, and then you can explode in year 3. Some guys might go for that, and maybe Gonzaga will find a point guard who's willing to do that. They also might arguably already have one in Luka Krajinovic. But I don't think you can convince Bronny of that, and I understand from his perspective why he wouldn't do that. So that's kind of where I'm at with Bronny right now. It'll be fascinating to see where he does end up. I think there's a lot of potentially really good landing spots for him to find a better role next year and kind of prove some of the doubters wrong. Again, I don't think he's going to be a superstar, but he's certainly better than what he showed at USC last year. Next question here comes from Christian via Gmail. Christian says, what might the Lady Zags do in the transfer portal? Any areas of need or potential players? Jeff via Gmail also asked about that, except he asked about a specific player. His question, with Hailey Van Lith, who grew up in Central Washington, in the transfer portal again, is there a chance she could come to Gonzaga for her final year of eligibility? Let's start with the Hailey Van Lith of it. I would be very surprised if she committed to Gonzaga. Very, very, very surprised. But I also see the connection. Like you said, she's from Central Washington. She's currently dating Jalen Suggs. Now, Jalen Suggs is not at Gonzaga. Jalen Suggs is actually literally across the entire country from Spokane, as he plays for the Orlando Magic. So I don't really see that connection mattering all that much. Maybe Jalen will say great things about Gonzaga. Maybe that'll convince her to give it a consideration. I've seen rumors that Washington is in the mix for her, which makes sense. As again, she's from Washington. Washington moves to the Big Ten, etc. But Van Lith is a very, very well-known brand and name in women's college basketball right now. And I think that works for and against Gonzaga. The Gonzaga women's team is not at that level where they are pulling in big brand names. This could help them get there. And the Van Lith-Ejim combination for a Coach Fortier would be extraordinary. I mean, I think that the fit is there. The Trunk twins are graduating. They're out of eligibility. There's 2 starting spots in the backcourt. Brenda Maxwell is out the door as well as she's graduating. 3 spots open up. Van Lith has the experience, has the ability to step in and be, the best or second best player in the WCC behind Yvonne. I really see the fit. I just don't think Gonzaga's women's team hasn't gotten to the level where they're pulling in this kind of transfer portal addition. Coach Fortier hasn't really navigated the portal all that much. She's indicated that she prefers to build teams through development and through recruiting, and they have a huge recruiting class coming in of a lot of really talented women. They have a handful of freshmen who didn't play much last year who are going to step into bigger roles, as well as veteran players like Callie Stokes, like Maud Hybens. Like, they're going to have a good roster already. And I think Coach Fortier's general plan is to just kind of fill out some roster spots around the edges in the transfer portal rather than making big, huge splashes. Having said that, absolutely have to attempt to get Hailey Van Lith to come to Spokane. The fit is there. The need is there. The connection is at least there in some way. And this would be the kind of move that would put Gonzaga more on the map on the women's side in terms of getting more TV deals and more conversation nationally, because they haven't quite hit that level of notoriety that the men's team has. This is the kind of move that would do that, but I don't see it happening. It's kind of a chicken and the egg thing. I don't think that Van Lith is going to she would have to bring the program to that level, but I'm not sure she's willing to go to a program that's not already at that level, if that makes sense. Well, what can they learn from UConn's dominant 2-year stretch as they prepare for a national championship game here on Monday night? We're going to discuss that and more after a word from today's sponsor, LinkedIn Jobs. Folks, when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, which has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster, and they do it for free. And thankfully, LinkedIn is not just another job board. They have a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, making it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals that you cannot find anywhere else. And LinkedIn does all that while making the process both easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. And LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and they may not have the time or the resources to hire. So they're constantly finding ways to make that process easier. For example, LinkedIn just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're still going through Mailbag Monday here as we're still kind of transitioning into the off season here on the Locked On Zags podcast. This next question here comes from Christian via Gmail. Christian says, what can be learned from this UConn team? Are there facets of this 2-year run that other programs can emulate? I've heard the thought spoken and read that you can build an excellent team and design a system that works for that group of players and repeat. If you can do that on a consistent basis, you will break through and win the whole darn thing. GU is doing this already. Yeah, I think UConn embodies a lot of what Gonzaga is trying to do. And UConn has been very successful at it. Gonzaga has also been extremely, extremely successful. They just haven't broken all the way through to that national championship, something that UConn, somewhat frustratingly, has been able to do a whole bunch of times. They're going for their 6th national championship since 1999. Or I think so. I think it's since 1999. Either way, UConn has a bunch of rings, and they've had a similar amount of regular season success, but Gonzaga's got the huge Sweet 16 streak. Like, they've done things that other programs have not done. They've made it to 2 national championships, and they were starting at a level lower than UConn. UConn has been in power conferences. They've played better regular season schedules, and I think that a lot of people will say that that's the reason Gonzaga hasn't broken through. And while I've kind of been hesitant to assume that the WCC means Gonzaga can't win a championship. I mean, the WCC is not the reason Gonzaga blew a 6-point lead late in the game against North Carolina. I just think it's kind of a silly argument, but I do think that Gonzaga is doing what UConn has been able to do and find success doing. And UConn doesn't do it by adding a whole bunch of 5-star recruits. They have one right now in Stephon Castle. He's been fantastic for this team. He had a monster game against Alabama. Without him, they may not win that game. That was the best game I've seen him play, and he's been a really good player for them all year long. But they don't add a bunch of 5-star talent. They develop talent on their own, like guys like Alex Karaban and Donovan Clingan, who develop within the system. They add key transfers when they need to. Tristan Newton has been an extremely valuable transfer addition the last couple of years. Cam Spencer was a big portal addition this last year as well. And that's a lot of what Gonzaga does. They have a couple pieces that they develop internally. They have a couple pieces that they add in the transfer portal. And then every once in a while, they land a big 5-star one-and-done caliber recruit. So they're not doing a whole lot different. And Mark Few has a system. He has an offensive and a defensive scheme that he tries to fill players that fit those schemes, but also makes adjustments in the season. Like, hey, this is not a roster where we can run as much as previous years, or this is not a roster where we can do as much pick and roll stuff. And instead, we're just going to get the ball to Drew Timme early like they did last year. Like, he makes those adjustments based on the personnel that he has. And this year he had to make a lot more adjustments, more on the fly, because of Steele Venters' injury and what that did for the roster. But a lot of what works for UConn and Danny Hurley is what is working for Gonzaga as well. The tournament is a crapshoot. It really is. And that's not to take away from UConn doing what they've done. They have won every NCAA tournament game in the last 2 years by 13 or more points. Every single one of them. That is tremendous. And that is not luck. The tournament is a crapshoot. I stand by that, but it is not luck that UConn has done this 2 years in a row. They are incredibly good, well-coached, disciplined, talented, experienced team. And it is showing in this situation of how dominant they have been these last 2 years in the NCAA tournament. But Gonzaga's doing all the right things. And I think that should be, watching UConn success should be encouraging for Gonzaga, because they're doing a lot of that same stuff, and it has worked. It hasn't quite gotten them over that last hump, but it has worked. And I think that that is a testament to Mark Few's ability to kind of figure out what works for this team and make those adjustments. And I do believe that eventually it will lead to this team breaking through. Next question here comes from Jeff via Gmail. Jeff says, Purdue dominated in rebounding by 15 or more in every NCAA tournament game they played, except for Gonzaga, where Purdue's margin was only 6. It makes me wonder if Gonzaga's 4-5 quad had been swapped with the Duke-Wisconsin quad, and Gonzaga had been able to play in the South region, especially with the way injury problems impacted Houston. Probably an impossible question to answer, but does this make you wonder what if? Not really. Not really. No, I mean, there's the amount of factors that would go into this is just silly. If you were to just replace Gonzaga with Wisconsin, if that's the situation we're in here, Gonzaga plays James Madison in the first round. That's a better or a worse matchup for Gonzaga than McNeese. I don't know that James Madison is demonstrably better than McNeese. I do think that they are better, but it is a worse matchup for Gonzaga to the point where maybe instead of making the Sweet 16 for, the 9th straight year, Gonzaga loses the first round for the first time since they played Davidson in 2008. I don't know that this what if scenario works. Yes, I mean, obviously you can't predict that Jamal Shead would also get hurt if he was playing Gonzaga instead of playing Duke. I don't know. I also think a Houston team, even without a healthy Jamal Shead, might still be too much for Gonzaga just with their physicality, with their ability to defend. I think it would be a rock fight, but I'm not sure Gonzaga even comes out of that game. And maybe they do. Maybe they totally do. Maybe NC State still beats Marquette. Maybe Gonzaga is able to beat NC State. Who knows? That totally could happen, but it's sort of silly to project. I don't think this Gonzaga team was winning a national championship. They weren't good enough defensively. They weren't good enough as a three-point shooting team. You look at the KenPom data. Historically, since KenPom started tracking data, every team that's won a national championship has been a top 22 in adjusted defensive efficiency. Meanwhile, every team that has won a championship has been over 33% from the three-point land, and I think all but 2 of them have been over 35%. I just don't think Gonzaga had a national championship contending team, even with how hot they were down the stretch. But maybe a different region gets them to the Elite Eight, maybe it gets them to the Final Four, in which case, hey, you never know. But I don't know. I don't think that Purdue is obviously a tough matchup for Gonzaga, but I don't know that it would have mattered if they were in a different region necessarily. Well, should Mark Few utilize his bench more? This is a topic that's discussed quite a bit. We're going to break it down a little bit here, as well as discussing Gonzaga's coaching tree. Where does it rank all time? More on all that after a word from today's sponsor, Amazon Fire TV. Folks, Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. And Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick, which you can plug into your existing TV to provide access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's March Madness, whether it's the opening weekend or opening weeks for Major League Baseball, you're going to want to have yourself a Fire TV. And we have Amazon Fire Sticks on literally every single TV in our house because I love the layout. I like the user experience. I even love the remote, which is super handy and has buttons that take you directly to Prime Video, Netflix, Disney Plus, and Hulu. Fire TV also recently created Fire TV channels, which deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands for free, including Locked On. You can go check out all the Locked On content on an Amazon Fire TV. They also have great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, and cooking videos as well. So check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't done so yet, you should. Trust me on this one. To learn more, visit amazon.com/lockedonfiretv. All right, folks, a couple more questions here to round out this Mailbag Monday edition of the Locked On Zags podcast. This one comes from Zigzag to the Top on Discord, who says, I have great respect for Mark Few both on and off the court, but I feel his weak spot as a coach might be his tendency to utilize a small rotation and allow a lot of talent to grow weary on the bench and either not develop or ultimately transfer. Do you feel this is something that needs to change in order to build a robust team that is more capable of absorbing season-ending injuries and also offer different matchup combinations for any opponent in order to bring home a national title? Do you think the tendency to have a small rotation might discourage recruits from selecting Gonzaga knowing they're limited to a role off the bench? I think almost all of this is a fallacy. First of all, Gonzaga's rate of players transferring out because they're unhappy with playing time, they've had 2 ever. And I think because they were so recent, it is fresh in people's minds. And obviously Hunter Salas' season at Wake Forest stings a little bit. But people act like this is a recurring common thing at Gonzaga of players leaving because they're frustrated with playing time. And it is unbelievable how much more often, teams like Carolina and Kentucky and Kansas and other programs like that, their attrition rate, they're losing 2 to 3 players off their bench basically every year. Gonzaga's had it happen twice ever. Like you look historically at this, and obviously the transfer portal has changed things. So I know that looking at historical data is, not as productive, but like this is just not something that's happened at Gonzaga all that often. So this idea that Mark Few's not playing his bench enough and that's why players are leaving is just, it immediately falls flat because they just don't have this happening very often. Beyond that, the reason that this does not work for me at all is that the best teams in college basketball play a short bench. The idea that Mark Few needs to play more players in order to win more just falls completely flat on its face when you look at the data, just the pure numbers. Most teams in college basketball don't play a ton of depth. Purdue and UConn, in their final 4 games that happened on Saturday, both of them had just 6 players score. 1 player came off the bench and scored for either team. It was Mason Gillis for Purdue. It was Samson Johnson for UConn. That's it. The teams, there's just not a lot of teams playing 8, 9, 10-man rotations in college basketball and succeeding. In fact, of the NCAA teams that rank the highest in bench usage, here are the teams that had the most bench usage who made the NCAA tournament: Samford, Auburn, Charleston, Western Kentucky, St. Peter's, Vermont, Colgate, Kentucky, Nebraska, Grambling. Not a single one of those teams advanced. Yes, some of them were lower seeds. Auburn wasn't. Kentucky wasn't. Nebraska wasn't an even matchup. The first team to win their first round game that actually played a deeper bench was Duquesne, which was just a kind of a wonky game. Shout out to Duquesne for winning, not trying to take anything away from them. But when you look at the lowest bench usage teams, that's Creighton. They advanced to the Elite 8 or Sweet 16, excuse me. Dayton, they advanced. Gonzaga, they advanced. Yale, they upset Auburn and advanced. UConn and Purdue are both outside the top 230 in the country in bench usage. Let's go back last year. UConn last year was 229th. The number 1 team in the country last year was Kansas. They were 361st. Third lowest bench usage in the country. Let's go back to 2022. In the title game, it was Kansas versus North Carolina. Both of them were outside the top 300. The best teams in college basketball do not play big benches. They don't. They never have. We could have gone back a lot longer on this data, and this would have continued to be proven true. Gonzaga is typically in the bottom 25-ish% in terms of bench usage, but so is Kansas, so is North Carolina. So are very frequently the teams that make it to the Final Four, that make it to the national championship game. Gonzaga does not have a history of players transferring out because they are frustrated with playing time. It has happened a few times recently, but it is not nearly at the level of many, many other programs. So without having an actual history of this happening, and with having a documented proof that teams that win championships frequently don't play a lot of bench depth, and the fact that Gonzaga has made it to 9 straight Sweet 16s without playing a lot of depth, there is an overwhelming amount of evidence that Mark Few's bench usage is not an issue for this program. Final question of the show comes from Jeff via Gmail. Jeff says, Dan Monson was the head coach at Gonzaga with Mark Few, Tommy Lloyd, and Leon Rice as assistant coaches. With how successful each has been over the past 25 years, where do you think the Gonzaga coaching tree ranks among other coaching trees in NCAA history? So I'm not going to do the amount of research it would take to look I'm not looking up rosters for every team in the last 40 years to try to figure this bad boy out. Gonzaga's is pretty darn good. It's pretty darn good. How Tommy does at Arizona will really determine how great it actually is, because he's only been there for a couple of years. Jeff went on in his question to mention the team's NCAA tournament records, which, are a little bit spotty. Rice obviously has yet to get over that hump and win a game in the NCAA tournament. Tommy Lloyd's only 4-3. Monson's 4-9. Granted, after he left Gonzaga, there wasn't a lot of teams that really had a chance to be particularly successful in the NCAA tournament. Just off the top of my head, there are ones that are better, or at least on track to probably be better than this. Scott Drew's coaching tree right now is Jerome Tang, who already took a team to the Elite 8 in his first year as a head coach at Kansas State. Grant McCasland had a lot of success at North Texas, is now at Texas Tech. Paul Mills took Oral Roberts to the Sweet 16 as a 15 seed. He's now the head coach at Wichita State. That's a really good one. Creighton at one point had Dana Altman, now the coach at Oregon. Greg McDermott, who of course has been the coach at Creighton. Darian DeVries, who had fantastic success at Drake and now takes over as the head coach at West Virginia. That's a really good one. Heck, Columbia. In 2012, 2013, Columbia had Kyle Smith, Todd Golden, and Mike Magpeo, who's the head coach at UC Riverside. The Duke team in 2014-15 had Coach K, Jeff Capel, who's a super successful head coach at Pitt. They also had John Shire. that's just doing a little bit of research, finding a few different ones. Gonzaga's is very good. I'm not trying to denigrate them, take away from them. This is a massively successful coaching tree. We didn't even mention Roger Powell, who's the head coach at Valparaiso. We didn't mention John Jacuz, who's the head coach at Florida Atlantic. That just happened, so he hasn't had any success yet, but is a former Gonzaga. He was the director of basketball ops, so I guess depending on how much you extend at that coaching tree, he also comes from the Scott Drew coaching tree as well. But Gonzaga's is great. And it's a testament to Mark Few. It's a testament to the staff, the agency that he gives them within the program to have that kind of success. But there have been a lot of really, really good coaching trees. Bobby Hurley and Nate Oates worked together at Buffalo. I know that one's another one that comes up off the top of my head. Like, there have been some fantastic coaching trees that have existed throughout college basketball's history. And Gonzaga's got a great one because they're a great program. Most great programs are going to end up having coaches who leave and find success elsewhere. We'll see if that continues for Gonzaga with Tommy's success, if they have any other coaches potentially leave and take jobs. Don't think it's happening this year, but it could happen eventually. You never know. But yeah, it's fun to track down these coaching trees and kind of look at where that success comes from. But Gonzaga is always going to have a lot of success as long as Mark Few is the head coach, and they're going to continue to churn out really good coaches throughout college basketball in the future. It's going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. I want to thank all of you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Shout out to those of you who are everyday listeners hanging out with us here as we get into the off season. We're going to get into that season in review series. I promise we're going to start it here this week, start getting you getting out of this season, talking about how every player did, talking about whether they hit their best or worst case scenarios. We'll, of course, keep you updated on the transfer portal, keep you updated on any other news and happenings going on with this Gonzaga team as we get out of the college basketball season. Thanks again, and until next time, as always, go Zags.